Hey, I'm Lou Brutus. It is always a pleasure to welcome my next guest. You know him from System of a Down and his other fine solo music. He is an author, an activist, a filmmaker, and probably most important to get all of that stuff done, a serious coffee connoisseur. Serj Tankian is my guest. Serj, it's great to see you. I see you. I know. I got mine going too. How are you? It's great to see you.
Great to see you, Lou. It's been a while, man. I miss you.
Yeah, I miss you too. I'm glad to see you looking so well. And we certainly have a lot of ground to cover, but maybe we start with coffee, because you and I have had some serious coffee discussions before. And as I watched your film and read up on Armenia, I discovered how truly important coffee is to Armenia and Armenian society. It's actually for centuries been a way for people to meet socially. So tell me about your background and your family's background with coffee.
So yeah, I'm a connoisseur. I love coffee. I've got my own coffee line called Kavat Coffee, and we started making organic Armenian coffee, which is prepared the same way, the old school way, over the stove with the little cauldron, and coffee is a big part of Mediterranean culture. It's an Eastern European culture, and so I've learned a lot about coffee getting into the business, and which has been amazing. But the conversation reminds me of when I was able to take Anthony Bourdain to Armenia for CNN's show that he had before he passed, and he did a episode on Armenia, and we were talking about coffee and food and geopolitics and everything that Tony would. But that's what you just reminded me of.
Yeah, I think he was a pretty interesting human being, and I think coffee is an important tool for you. Your love of coffee and the amount of different things you do remind me very much of my late friend Frank Zappa, who didn't do drugs, didn't drink alcohol, but that guy smoked like a chimney and drank coffee 24/7.
So for this film, even though it's not in the film, but because we were doing a film for years, I knew I was going to do a film. I was shooting a lot of stuff. So the Zappa estate had reached out, and I had done a cover of Yellow Snow for Frank's birthday on iTunes years ago. And that's when I took the opportunity to ask Gail if I can visit the studio. And she said, yeah, of course. So we made an arrangement and went with cameras. And it was such an amazing experience. I learned so much about his workflow. I saw his studio, his reverb chamber, and all of that stuff. And yeah, huge fan. Again, unfortunately, it's not in the film, because what we decided to do is we decided to focus on the activism storytelling, because that, for me, turned out to be the most interesting part. There's obviously musician, background and bio aspects of it, System of a Down. But to me, the real story was what happens to the storyline of an activist before he's got a big voice, and then during the course when his voice becomes multiplied by the success of the music and the band, etc., and then the repercussions of being an artist and an activist, and some of the fruits of that labor of being an activist and seeing some of that work come to fruition, like the Congress recognizing the Armenian Genocide in December 2019 is an example. So that kind of became the crux of the story we wanted to tell.
I think one of the most fascinating parts of the film is the familial background, and perhaps you can give us a taste of that, perhaps beginning with your grandfather, who really had a tremendously, I would think, difficult but very interesting life. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to guess that he was a pretty tough old bird.
He was. My grandfather Stepan was definitely tough guy. He had, he was a survivor of the Armenian Genocide. He had seen a lot of his family members perish in front of his eyes as a kid, my son's age at this point. And so he was definitely, he had seen a lot of stuff. He had seen death and come back in a way. And we had him in a film called Screamers years ago, which we borrowed some of that footage for this film. And, you know, all my grandparents are survivors of the genocide, and they told us about what happened, the truth of what happened 100 years ago in Ottoman Turkey, and how the Armenians were massacred and etc. So, you know, so one of our band's basically things that we always talked about on a personal level was that recognition. And it's very important to this story as well, because the non-formal recognition of the Armenian genocide in a well-known democracy like the United States made me an activist, because it made me go, how many truths are out there that are not being realized or spoken about because there's some kind of political implication, economic expediency, or whatever the cover-up matter is, you know? It made me an activist.
And again, tell me about the awakening that you helped bring about here in the United States, because you yourself ran up against incredible friction as you tried to bring this to the forefront. And there were some folks in politics who at first appeared perhaps to be allies of getting the word out. And then you find out behind the scenes, you know, maybe not so much.
Right. So, you know, the kind of work to try to get Congress to recognize the genocide and multiple different presidents to use the word genocide correctly and to coin history, American history as well as Armenian history, has been a very tough kind of struggle. And one of those things, you know, one thing that John and I from my band, we participated in is years ago, we went to Congress. At the time, Dennis Hastert was the Speaker of the House. And at the time, Variety had written a piece by this woman, Sibel Edmonds, who was an FBI translator. And she had overheard Turkish conversations about how they're funding this guy, Dennis Hastert, so that he doesn't bring the genocide resolution up for a House vote at the time. Dennis Hastert ended up in jail, not for taking bribes, but for he used to be a wrestling coach, and there were, you know, you remember the story. So he actually ended up in jail. That was, I mean, I got to say that's karma, but, you know, but he was never implicated for these crimes, which I consider as potent. But, you know, it's just been a long process. And, you know, this has a lot to do with the ability of foreign countries to use K Street lobbying firms to lobby our Congress, to lobby our government, to lobby our State Department, to change course based on their likes and dislikes, rather than what is good for the American people, what is good for the country.
Do you ever find it shocking at how easy it is and how cheaply it can sometimes be done to buy influence in the U.S. government or other governments around the world? We're not the only one with the problem.
Oh, yeah. Easier elsewhere. You know, yeah. I've always, you know, when I always complained that, you know, years before the 2018 Velvet Peaceful Revolution in Armenia, we used to have a very corrupt, overtly corrupt government, you know. It was overtly corrupt because you knew, you know, you could pay off cops, you could pay off judges. It was very openly corrupt. And when I would talk about it in Armenia openly, etc., because I would challenge that. To me, injustice is injustice wherever you are. It doesn't matter whether you're in the U.S., in Armenia, in Israel, in the Arab world, whatever. You know, there's injustice everywhere, obviously. But when I would talk to them, I'd be like, don't think that I'm coming from the U.S. saying that you're corrupt because you're a former Soviet regime. The U.S. is corrupt as well. It's legalized there. You know, K Street lobbying firms, super delegates, the Electoral College is a form of legalized. I don't want to use the word corruption. K Street is corrupt, but it's a way of subverting the popular vote. And no matter how you look at that, it's undemocratic. So, you know, it's an interesting distinction, you know, that I think it would behoove our nation to once and for all dismantle that money in politics once and for all, because then you really get, you know, the people's true voice coming through.
Yeah, I think you've hit on the most important thing amongst many important topics when dealing with politics in the U.S. around the world, but it's the dirty money that's in there that is just eating away at everything else. How do we turn that around? How do we make it stop?
enough pressure on Congress to dismantle all of the super PACs, dismantle K Street lobbying firms. The Electoral College has been rendered less and less effective because many states have their electors voting with the popular vote. So even though they have electors, they're not going to vote against the popular vote. I think there's only one state or two states left that don't do that. So, through democratic process is how we reverse it.
Excellent. Now back to the film more directly. I think one of the real emotional highlights of it is the System of a Down performance in Armenia. If you can tell me about what the buildup was to that, what the planning was logistically to get it done, and then about the night itself. It makes for beautiful cinema, and it's really something else to watch.
System of a Down had never played Armenia, and 2015 was the 100th year anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. The band was formally invited by the government to play a free show in Republic Square. So we were part of the whole planning process and trying to get approvals and bring things that they didn't have within the country, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was a long, tenuous process to get it done, but it was well worth it. And I remember the day right before we played the show, huddling with the guys in the band and just feeling this kind of intuitive belonging, feeling like we were kind of almost designed to play this one show. Like everything that we had done led up to this day. It's an incredible feeling to feel that. You don't feel that every day when you're playing on tour, It's this one occasion where you feel like this is incredibly important and special. And the show went great. And in the eyes of the spectators, the young people that were there, I could see the future progressive democratic future of Armenia. I didn't know that it was only going to take another 3 years for there to be a peaceful revolution and the whole systemic change was going to occur into a modern progressive democracy, which it did in the 2018 Velvet Revolution.
And again, I'm assuming that the fans showing up not only know that, System of a Down's great band and they have great songs, but that you guys are eyeball deep in the struggle they have had there for over a century, right? Tell me about what you were hearing and getting back from folks that you met on the ground there face to face. What sorts of things were they sharing with you and telling you?
Well, for a small nation, Armenians are the country has 2.5 to 3 million people. And, the rest of the Armenian diaspora is another maybe 6-7 million at best, probably less. So we're a very small country. Small countries have immense pride in other people acknowledging their existence, and having a famous band that speaks about what is important to Armenians, along with the recognition of, among which is the recognition of the genocide, makes us beyond just artists. So, if an old Armenian woman or grandfather is walking along the street and they see one of us, they're like incredibly enthused and thrilled, although they've never heard a System song in their lives, because it's a form of national pride, and we're very grateful and humbled by it, and always try to use it for good. So that aspect exists among our people because we're a small country, we're a small people.
Was part of the reason this genocide was, I don't know how else to put it, relatively easy to cover up for so long, was the fact that it began in the middle of World War I, which was the greatest carnage, or one of the greatest carnages that the human race has ever seen. That it was just a sideshow of this other nightmare going on.
I would say that wasn't the main reason for the cover-up. I would say the main reason for the cover-up is, unlike World War II, there were no Nuremberg trials after the fact. President Woodrow Wilson, our president in the U.S. at the time, tried to do something like that with the League of Nations, which was the precursor of the United Nations. And
was shot down and had it negated by Congress, yeah.
Exactly. It was shut down, exactly, and negated by Congress. Congress was more interested in the oil rights that were in the collapsing Ottoman Empire, rather than getting justice for the victims of the Armenian genocide, the Greeks, the Assyrians, people that were basically wronged during the war. And so that's an incredible story that we need to learn. And that also teaches us something about today, that if we act with impunity for our selfish efforts of resource acquisition, or anything of that aspect without taking into consideration whose lives we're affecting, it is the most dangerous thing, because that's still happening. We haven't learned that lesson yet. I'm not talking about the United States. I'm talking about the world community, obviously. So yeah, that's really important. But it was because there were no trials. After World War II, the Holocaust was basically, the Nuremberg trials happened to deal with the perpetrators of the Holocaust. They were sent to prison. They were there was a huge investigation and all of this stuff. Some had escaped, obviously, Argentina and different parts of the world, who were later caught up with, etc. But that never happened with the genocide, because too many countries, the allies that won the war, were dissuaded from justice by trying to open up Turkey as a new market, by the oil interests, because at the time the Ottoman Empire included the majority of the Middle East, which was Iraq, Syria, Iran, Lebanon, and all these countries, a lot of oil producing countries. So that became kind of like, let's go get their oil and not forget about this other stuff. But luckily that didn't happen after World War II, that there were actual trials to deal with the Holocaust. And I should add that Hitler learned from the genocide. Remember, Turkey and Germany were allied in both world wars. And he saw that after the First World War, the Allies were more interested in conquering whatever was left of Turkey and oil profits and stuff. And when he told his generals in 1939 to invade Poland, he used this term. He said, after all, who remembers the Armenians? In other words, go act with impunity. No one's going to remember this. It doesn't matter. It gave him the ability to think that he can get away with mass murder with Jews and the Holocaust.
Does it really all come down to money, oil dollars, and economies? Because, any rational person would say war is bad, killing is bad, mass killing is bad. You would think that we'd be able to wake up tomorrow and go, let's stop butchering one another. Let's start feeding one another. Let's go conquer the stars and move out into the rest of the universe.
Right.
Is it just greed that's holding us all back?
I think it's more than that. I think when two neighbors meet, generally, person to person, there's usually a humanity that's recognized in each other, right? Nations should meet each other that way. If the world meets each other that way, it'll be a different thing. It'll be, in other words, let's stop acting like 8-year-old kids in our foreign policy and me, grab me, rather than really look at the full picture of not just what's going on now and what is necessary for our country versus others, but also what the future holds. We're in an existential time in terms of climate change, and we don't have time to bicker and play for oil politics, because the end game is going to concern us all. There's no time for stupid shit like that. And that's what we've been dealing with for centuries.
Well, where can people see the movie? Where can they check it out? I feel a bit cheated that I saw it online. I would have much preferred to have seen it in a theater.
I haven't seen it in a theater, so don't feel.
Yeah, that's gotta suck. But tell me where's the easiest way for people to gain access to the film, and what are the dates and all that?
So you can go to truth to power. Sorry, I said truth for power, but that's wrong. truthtopowerfilm.com, and you will see a host of websites that are basically doing a virtual theatrical release. You can buy tickets through any of those websites, they're partners, and see the film starting Friday, which is February 19th. And down the line, it'll be available on iTunes and other on-demand type of platforms, and later on streaming down the line further from there.
Are you keeping your fingers crossed for somewhere down the line that you'll actually be able to do some showings in theaters properly and do something fun?
Absolutely, bro. Yeah, I mean, we were supposed to release both of, not just this film, but I have another film I've executive produced and scored about the revolution in Armenia. It's an award-winning film called I Am Not Alone. And that was supposed to come out last year. So was this. And because of COVID, obviously everything was canceled. So that's coming out this year as well. I am wishing that I could go sit in a theater and watch these films and other amazing films coming out this year sometime, hopefully.
Serj, you mentioned, creating film music and scoring. Let's move into some musical stuff right now. First of all, when it comes to creating music, even if it's just a song for a movie, what's the process like? Do you watch it first? Do you always get to see it? Because sometimes it's not created. Like, how do you sort of build that stuff so it matches? You want it to mesh perfectly. How do you do that?
It starts with a conversation with the director usually, and reading the script, so you have an idea of what the tone, mood, emotion of the film is going to be. Thereafter, generally, I do a few themes just to kind of understand if I'm in the ballpark musically of what they're trying to, portray in terms of the musical tapestry. And at that point, I lock in what it is they're looking for in terms of instrumentation, in terms of sound, emotion. And then once you have the final cut of the film laid out, the visuals laid out, you're able to take those ideas and then you work on to picture, basically, which is very kind of scientific and beginning to end kind of musical bed. But you don't always get the final cut. Sometimes, in a lot of cases, they don't have enough time for you to finish your music. Instead of giving you 2-3 months, they're like, okay, we have 3 weeks for you to do all the music, an hour and a half in 3 weeks. So you have to start early, which means you have to start with the non-final cut, early cuts, rough cuts, and then migrate your music accordingly. So some scenes might be deleted, some scenes might get shorter, longer. So you have to be flexible and be able to kind of manage that, and I've figured out how to do that over time.
Is it ever frustrating for you because when you make an album of your own and you've got full and total control? However, when you've got a director who's directing their film and you are just a guy, adding music to it, they have final say over how your art is used. Is that ever rub you the wrong way, or do you ever disagree and have to let it go?
There are a few times it has, but generally it's actually been a very smooth process, partly because I also have my outlet. I write music for myself to release, and so not like I don't have that outlet. A lot of composers don't, they don't release music on their own. They just work for hire. In my case, I do both. So I kind of welcome the opportunity to be creative within limitations, and because that's a different feat altogether. It actually makes things simple for me because, when you talk to a director and they say, okay, well, I want this whole film to be a cello and a violin. And you're like, sweet. Great. Now I know the instruments I'm going to use. That's going to save both of us a shitload of time because I know I'm not going to give you a ukulele. I'm going to give you, so it kind of works. But there are times where it's more of a method of working that sometimes doesn't match. And I do, scoring has taught me to be more detached from my art. And that is a new gift that I've received because that detachment makes you a better songwriter. It makes you a better composer because, okay, you don't like that? Fine. That music's not going to disappear. It's back on my drive. I'll use it for something else. How about this? Oh, you like that? Great. One little change on it. You want pianos there? Okay, we'll add pianos there. Wow, that actually did sound better. It's not that hard.
At what point did you realize you enjoyed wearing a lot of different hats and keeping yourself busy? Because again, at the top of the interview, I mentioned filmmaker and music, and you're a great graphics artist and a great painter. I kind of picture you just waking up in the morning and it's like Groundhog Day. It's like, I got 45 things to do today and I'm going to get them all done, and bang goes the coffee, and then out goes the coffee, with his laundry list of stuff. At what point in your life did you realize, hey, I can actually do all these things and I can get them done if I sort of keep my shit organized?
A lot of the art stuff works together. Whether I'm painting or doing music, I'll play a piece of music while I'm painting, and that'll inspire something else in the painting itself. It all co-inspires because art is art. Activism is just something that, for me, I've always been a seeker of truth and someone who's gone after justice. So that's been in me before the music, before the art, and it's just who I am. So I really don't kind of relegate different terminology on anything that I do. I just kind of wake up and do what I do, and it all fits in.
Do you ever find it a challenge when you are trying to deal with serious subject matter to turn it into good art? You want to keep the message pure, but you've still got to make it, like in the case of a song, it's still got to be a good song. You still want it to be catchy. Do you ever find it hard to mesh the two things together?
It is. That's a really good question, Lou. It's sometimes you have this incredible concept lyrically, and you have this piece of music, and you're trying to make this powerful statement, and it's just not there, and then you just don't release that, or you work, or you change it, and if it doesn't work out, you don't release it. You can't release something that you don't feel confident about, no matter what the intention behind it is. That's a very good question, actually.
Thank you. Let's talk about Elasticity. When and where did you write and record this? And tell me about getting it all done, because, I know some folks have sat on stuff and then released it, and some got created during post-pandemic. And, what's the story on this?
So the majority of the songs on Elasticity were written anywhere between 4 to 6 years ago, and just finished about more than a year ago. So it's kind of been in the can waiting to be released. And so, and when they came to me, it was like a few rock songs came to me that had the punk attitude. And at the time I was like, we were, the guys from System, and we were all conferring about working together on new material. And it definitely had that attitude that System has, and it made me feel like we might be able to work it out. But ultimately, to basically say it shortly, because it's been said many times, we weren't able to see creatively and philosophically eye to eye to move forward in the same vision and direction. So I decided to finish the songs myself to release them.
And who did you work with? Who's laying down the music? Who produced? Who engineered? What studios? Tell me all the nuts and bolts.
Well, it was all done in my studio, and I pretty much did the majority of the music, as well as obviously lyrics and vocals, and programmed a lot of the drums. They're based on live performances that I had from other records that I've done, that I've cut into loops and used, and then kind of done some additional programming. Guitars, bass, keyboards, pianos, I've done them all. And then I brought in Dan Monty, who's a really good friend of mine, who's the guitarist for FCC, my backup band, on my solo stuff. And he's a phenomenal engineer. So he helped me mix. He did additional guitars, because he's also a badass guitarist, and some additional drum programming as well where necessary. And we literally finished it in the can at my own studio, yeah.
Having been a recording artist for a long time, do you ever find it amazing that you can get such high quality done at home? Because it was not always the case.
No, definitely. Yeah, I am amazed, and I started from the 4-track to the 16-track digital, to the computer recording, to the mega computer recording, to the multiple computers interacting, it's like, so I've gone through the whole gauntlet of the, Beatles type of recording until where we are today, which is cool, because you appreciate the fact that you have unlimited tracks, so it's quite an amazing thing. But I'll tell you, Lou, it doesn't matter, shit in, shit out,
Yeah.
good in, good out, right?
You can have the greatest studio in the world. If the song sucks, it's just going to have finer audio quality with its suckage.
Yeah, it's gonna have nice bells and whistles,
Tell me about the video for Elasticity, because if it was shot post-COVID, you were lucky enough to get everybody tests or something. There's a big group of people in it. Tell me about getting it made.
So that was shot during COVID, which is interesting. And it was shot in Russia, in Moscow. And it was produced by a really good friend of mine, director Ilya Naishuller, who just made a Universal film with Bob Odenkirk called Nobody, coming out very, very soon.
Oh, I saw the coming attractions for that. Yeah.
He's a really good director and a good friend of mine. And he made this, years ago, he made this incredible film called Hardcore Henry, which is a POS film. So the whole film, it's like a video game, is from the character's eye. And it's kind of like a film that's kind of like a video game, that you're living that person's experience. And it's mostly just fighting and breaking and jumping and flying.
I saw that. I swear I saw it. Yeah,
right?
Yeah. It's really strange at first. it takes you a couple of minutes to understand, okay, how am I going to experience this film? And I know a number of people who bailed on the first couple of minutes, and I'm like, no, get 3 or 4 minutes in. Well, yeah, but once you kind of understand what's going on, it's a fascinating film and a really interesting way to put things together. I'm sorry, please continue.
Oh, that's cool. And so I've known Ilya since then. I did some guitars for him and we became friends. And so when I was making this film, when we were making this video for Elasticity, I reached out to him and I said, I really need your help. I need to make a cool video. I want it to be more like a short film, not on the nose kind of thing, because the song's wild and it would be nice to have a completely different interpretation of what it might mean. So he went back and forth and made it happen, and with a director named Vlad, and we got this really cool actress. She's really huge in Russia. Her name's Sasha Bortnik, and she acted in it. And so I'm very grateful. I met her years ago while on tour through another director friend. And so it just really worked out.
It's fun to know interesting and creative people, isn't it?
It is. It truly is. I mean, for artists, it's food, right? Like, just like we eat and drink, for creativity, being around creative people is inspiring, seeing what they do, the challenges they're dealing with, the creative, something amazing that they do, and you learn from it, and you're like, oh, it just makes you want to go create, without that, it's hard. And that's the thing about COVID. It's harder to have that interaction, obviously, but we do it this way.
With all the interesting and fun film-related music you have done, what was the story behind getting to do Gozilla? Because the original from Blue Oyster Cult, it's a brilliant, genius song, and it's tons of fun. And you put a really interesting spin on it. How did it all come together?
The composer, Bear McCreary, is a very good friend of mine. And we've always talked about working together. We always catch up, and I love what he does. And so one day I remember we were in a park with the family, and he just called me and he's like, hey man, I have a crazy idea. I'm working on the Godzilla film. I'm like, oh, congratulations. That's awesome. He's like, I want to do the Blue Oyster cover. I'm like, I'm in. Like,
hello?
Yeah, hello. Yeah. I'm like, did the band say okay? Because I knew that for many years, the band were not cool with it. They didn't want to cover. And then so he goes, look, we'll have to demo it first, present it to the band, present it to the producers. They might say no. Are you willing to do it? I'm like, yeah, fine, let's do it. So it worked out. Everyone was happy.
Quick aside, because it's another great song from Blue Oyster called If Ever, Ever, Ever You're Looking for a Song to Cover, Joan Crawford Has Risen from the Grave. That song, you could do some crazy shit with it. Do you know the song?
I do know the song. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you would have a blast with that. But
dude,
it's amazing. With all this stuff you've done and that you do, is there anything that you haven't done that you'd like to, or have there been things that you tried and you thought, man, I suck at this, and it just didn't work out?
Many things. Look, I don't know. I wake up every day. If I have an idea, I try to enact it, and I try to make it work. But there are things that just don't work out, and you just let it go, and you got to know that that's not for you. But whatever excites me in the morning, Lou, like when I wake up, whatever excites me to work on that day, that's what I go with, because I know that excitement is going to get me through it. Because some of it is long-term, years in the making and whatnot. And I never thought I'd be involved in, making films. I knew I wanted to compose for films and work with directors, which I've been doing for a number of years, and I will continue to do because I enjoy it. But it just so happened that we made this film, Truth to Power. It just so happened that we made I Am Not Alone, because they were stories that I was desperate for people to see and hear. And and that gives you kind of like the angst, the ability, the inspiration to kind of go, okay, I'll help make it. Like, let's find people, let's get funding. I'll help fund it, whatever, let's work on it. Let's make it happen. And I want to continue doing that with important stories that are not out there.
Well, Serj, I got to tell you something. The best part of my job, I think, is that I get to speak to interesting people who do interesting things. And you're one of the most interesting folks I've spoken to in my long and dark career. And I always appreciate your time. And truthfully, I'm glad to see you so busy and even flourishing during these rather tough times. I appreciate your help, and great to see you. Congratulations on the film.
Lou, you are an absolute pleasure to talk to always, and I remember our conversations, and I look forward to the next time, my brother. Thank you again for your time, and continue to stay safe. I really appreciate it.
And let us continue to drink strong coffee. And although, again, I got to get out someplace for you. You and I got to sit up one night, all night, and just drink, Superman strength coffee and talk about music. That would make me very happy.
I'm in. Excellent. I look forward to it. Yeah, bro. Cool. Have a good one.